Much better. There we go.
Ooh, I like the colors.
Demon in my face. We're all good.
Oh,
We got your Christmas tree up, huh?
okay. I'm going to hit the record button, but we're already live on YouTube. All right, and we're live. Here we are on another day that ends in Y. I'm in sunny Southern California. Hans, where are you tuning in from?
I'm living in Portland, Oregon, and we just had some crazy torrential downpours today, but the sun finally came back out. So yay to that.
Fantastic. Well, I am so happy and excited. For those of you watching on YouTube, you don't know this, but Hans and I were both speakers at the Biomed Expo in Los Angeles just last month. It was a really fantastic event. And that's where I got to meet him. And I learned about him being the author of the beautiful signs. They're like magical ancient symbols and signs, and the magic in these symbols. So Hans, thank you for joining us today. And I can't wait for us to dive in, sink our teeth into this incredible content, because there's so much esoteric, cosmic energy that is attached to signs and symbols.
Yes, there is. And thank you for having me on your podcast. This is awesome. Appreciate it.
So before we jump into the nitty-gritty of the content, tell me, what was the genesis? What was the kernel, the seed that gave you the impetus to want to write on the magic of symbols?
Wow. So this is a bit of my story. I grew up in South Asia, and I grew up around a lot of different cultural symbologies. And so my whole life I've been into art and artistry. I do graphic design and multimedia in my business. And I realized that all day long I'm creating symbols and symbology for different corporations, different companies, mom and pops, all the way to Fortune 500s. And I started realizing that a lot of these older corporate brands have a symbolic, an esoteric symbolic element to them, and oftentimes an occult symbology. Occult just means hidden, that's all. There's nothing nefarious about it.
Mhm.
But a symbol is like, if a photo is 1,000 words, a symbol is 100 words. And so it has the ability to tell a story through a visual implementation. And so it can be either an object, it can be a status, it can be something as simple as the icons and emoticons that we use on our phones and in our chats all day long. Or it can be something a little more endearing, like an actual corporate logo, or something that other people will see and recognize the culture, the value, and the story behind the symbol. And so growing up overseas, seeing all these different symbols around me, I really started to dive into some of the research around this, and decided to start lecturing on it, because this is what I do, and write a book about it, which is called The Magic of Symbols. And so a lot of my stuff stems back throughout history, primarily to goddess symbology and Saturnian symbology. But a lot of it also stems out of what we find in both Zen and Zoroastrian symbology. And this is where, going to art school and going through the motions of becoming a graphic designer, I had to learn the three basic elements of the triangle, the square, and the circle. And I didn't realize until I started researching this that these are the three oldest symbols that are the representation of not only the human form, but the universe.
Wow. So that's a lot of rich background that the universe, what I call God, but I know some people get a hang up over the word God. I don't, but if you do have a hang up with the word God, whenever I say God, just say universe. To me, they're the same. He doesn't get all hung up over it, and I don't think you should either, but hey, I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. For those of you watching here, this is for those of you that this message resonates. For the rest of you, there's a little X button. You do have a choice to stay or to go. I don't want to stay with anybody who doesn't want to stay with me. So moving on, Hans, the universe, God Almighty, strategically placed you where you were in the environment of being in Asia. as opposed to being in the United States in the Western world. And it sounds like you have a very rich background, and you were obviously, your persona is one that pays attention to detail, because otherwise you would have seen these symbols and they would not have made any difference. But for you, there was something about the vibrational frequency of those symbols that caught your eye and your attention and piqued your curiosity, right?
Oh, very much so. If we get into, horoscopic stuff, I'm not only a fire dragon in the Chinese horoscope, but I'm also a Virgo, and so there's a lot of rich symbology and noticing of this within both of these modalities. And so it's interesting to me that finding symbology in my own life has been rather huge. Yeah.
Really speaks to you.
It does.
And then you talked about Saturnian symbology. There is a high resonance when you say that to me. And I will be the first to tell you, I don't know a lot about astrology. I couldn't even tell you what the astrological signs of my 3 kids are. I, it's like I'm ignorant in that realm, but I have a certain knowingness on an energetic field. And several years ago, but actually during the pandemic in 2020, in one of my meditations, I was given this. I don't want to say it was a download, because it was an interactive discussion, if you will, in the meditation. And they told me that I was supposed to use the rings of Saturn to gain knowledge and information, and for it to guide me to do certain things. And when I was told that in the meditation, I came out and I'm like, okay, they tell me that I'm supposed to use that, but I'm like, how am I supposed to use it?
What am I looking at? Right.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, it's like you would think that they would have given me more specifics, but they didn't. And then as I went into another meditation, and then I had a situation, of course, I guess that was the preface or the prep. Then I had someone who was in front of me. And then when we were doing a specific modality with them, then it was revealed to me in real time while I was in front of the person that which is very curious. They told me just put one hand above the rings of Saturn and one below, and then just let them, it's like, I didn't know this at the time, or I don't even know if this is true in the 3D world. I just know that what was revealed during that session, that I was to hold like this, and that the rings would continue to gyrate. And all I'm supposed to do is hold that there. And then whatever it is that I need to know, that I would glean that in that moment for the benefit of this person. So that's what I did. And then, of course, we had incredible results. I'm just the conduit, right? So that's why when you say Saturnian, I still don't know a lot about Saturn. So I'm curious about what does the symbol, is there a symbol for Saturn? In fact,
There is.
there is?
It's an H with a cross through the H.
Really?
Yes. And so it's actually here on the cover of my book,
Really?
in the upper corner here. So this is the Saturnian symbol, and it's an
Really?
alchemical symbol. Saturn's an interesting one because it's one of the, outside of goddess worship, it's one of the oldest still practicing religious symbologies out there. And it's surrounding us every day without us really paying attention to it. The ancients would have seen Saturn in the night sky as a winged disk or a horned god if they were looking at the stars and planets as gods. And there's a possibility that in ancient times, Saturn was a lot closer to us based on our orbit around the sun. And so you always see a lot of symbols, especially cars, technology, gaming systems that deal with either a cube or a winged disc. And so the winged disc is this representation of Saturn, because this is how the ancients looked at it. To the Greeks and to the Romans, it was Kronos, or it was Saturn. Ancient Rome was called Saturnia. And during
Wait
the
a minute.
winter solstice, they would have a 3-day festival during the
Pause
winter
button.
solstice.
Pause button.
Okay.
You said ancient Rome was called Saturnia?
Yes, it was.
Why?
Because of Saturn, this god of the harvest. And so this is why Saturn was revered with a lot of ancient cultures, from Roman, Greek to Hindu to Egyptian, Islam, Judaism, Christianity. They all revolve around this god of the harvest. And so when Saturn comes into the prominent sky, especially in the northern hemisphere, because you don't really see a lot of it in the southern hemisphere so much, but in the northern hemisphere, it comes out around September to December, which is when it's most prominent. And this is right after your harvest. And so they figured, oh, this is the god of the harvest. And so we have to give homage to the god of the harvest. We have to sacrifice, unfortunately, to the god of the harvest, so that next year we will have another great harvest. And so oftentimes Saturn is shown with the scythe, or Kronos, as he was known to the ancient Greeks. Kronos was the god of all gods. He was the father of time. He was the father of all the gods and goddesses. But he was also known to eat his children. And so this was the interesting sacrifice around Kronos and Saturn. And so when you get into the symbology of Saturn, you always see him with the scythe. And so this is where the notation of possibly the Grim Reaper came from. But the Reaper we think of as, oh, this is a symbol of death, but it isn't. It's a symbol of life in an essence, because you reap what you sow. So when you sow your seeds in the spring, you reap the rewards of them in the fall. And this is where the harvester comes in to collect the crop with the scythe. And then you give a sacrifice of food or an animal in some cultures, or children in others, to give back to this god that then creates another year of a great harvest. And so this is why it's such an old symbology, that a lot of this practice has kind of shifted over into more modern practices that do mock sacrifices, in a sense, to give to the god of the harvest. And so again, ancient Rome was known as Saturnia. During the winter solstice, they would do a 3-day festival, which was called Saturnalia. And even the slaves of the Romans were able to come, and they would have table service. They could drink wine. They could indulge in all the parties during this 3-day festival. And then the year would renew, and you go into the spring and you'd sow your seeds and hope for a great harvest the next year. And so a lot of this dealt with, instead of the human hand being that of the green thumb of harvest, the thinking was more that the gods were that of the green thumb of harvest. Saturn's an interesting planet on its own. On the North and South Pole, there is a hexagonal storm within a hexagonal storm. And so one rotates in one direction and the other rotates in the other direction. And so this is fascinating, because one of the symbols of Saturn is the hexagon.
Well, it sounds like a Merkaba.
The cube. Bingo, you just nailed it.
And
yes.
and it's like the Merkaba and
Yes.
the Tesseract.
Yep.
Really?
It's toroidal energies that are counter rotating.
Yes.
And so a Merkaba is a tetrahedron with another tetrahedron stacked the other direction, equilibrium inside of it. And so where the tetrahedron would hit, if you were to put this inside of a planetary body, would be around the 42nd or 47th degree parallel on both sides. And this is where all of our major volcanic activities are on this planet. On Earth, it's where Hawaii sits. On Saturn, it's where the spot sits. On Jupiter, it's where the spot sits, and all the planets have this tetrahedral torsion dimension that are involved with it. And the Merkaba, here we have verbal symbol as well. Mer means water. Ka is your double, or your physical double. And your ba is your spirit in ancient Suf language. So Merkaba is the water of your double spirit. And so in my other book, dealing with legends and lore of connecting Sirius to a lot of these ancient cultures, they would use the Merkaba to astral project their physical form, or their double, throughout the dimensions of time, space, other realms, other planets, other suns, other galaxies. And when you spin these two things in science in double directions and you add chemistry to them, you create a physical vibrational field within the octahedron that is formed inside of that. And so it's interesting that when we sent Voyager out to Saturn, and Voyager took all these original photos of Saturn, there was this hexagonal storm at the North Pole of Saturn. And when we sent Cassini back, the storm is still there. And so the question is, how do the ancients know about this? Because the hexagon and the hexagram, which is the Star of David in a sense, is considered the hexagram, are both symbols of Saturn, where the centerpiece of the hexagram is a hexagon. And the hexagon is a two-dimensional shape that represents the cube as a three-dimensional shape. So there's a lot that goes into Saturnian symbology, for sure. And so you see a lot of modern logos, a lot of modern, corporate logos and vernacular revolving around the hexagon, the hexagram, and the cube. And these all deal with time travel. They all deal with travel in general. A lot of it deals with AI now. There's a lot of cube references in AI logos, and there's a lot of hexagon references as well. But there's also a lot dealing with travel in general and just computer sciences in general. And so you start looking at religions, and we start seeing the cube also involved in a lot of different religions. So in Judaism, they wear the tefillin, which is a black cube that either goes on their forehead or their heart arm. And in it is the prayer to El. El was also a Saturnian symbol. So El comes from Baal.
How do you spell
Baal, El. It's the singular of Elohim. Elohim is plural.
name for God?
El comes from Baal. Baal was the horned god of the ancient Greeks and Romans, and even before that to the Sumerians. And so there is a temple of Baal it's in Baalbek in Lebanon, and this became a Roman Saturnian temple until they tore it down, and now it is a temple to Jove, which is Jupiter. And so Jupiter was considered to the Greek pantheon the son of Kronos. And so it's gone from the father to the son. And so we see this in so many different religions where
Wow.
we're transferring from the Almighty to a physical manifestation. We see this with Het Ka Ptah or Kaptos in Egypt. Kaptos, Ka Ptah means the body of the creator, the body or the son of the creator. We see this in Judaism, obviously, as well. We see this in Christianity with Jesus, Jesus or Yeshua. Jesus is the son of Zeus, or the physical body or formation of Zeus. And so all these symbols come out of this ancient astrological symbology of Saturn. It's interesting that you're asking about this.
Wow. Loaded.
There's a lot there. I mean,
There is quite a bit.
I can't go through it all in 15 minutes. But
No, of course not. Yeah, of course not. Of course not. So what would you say as you wrote? Because one of the things that I've discovered as I've written books is that there's always something that is revealed to you that you didn't know before. What was the one thing that maybe either took you, caught you off guard, or surprised you that as you wrote that book and you digested it, so to speak, that you became aware of?
So actually, it doesn't deal with Saturnian symbology at all. This comes back to more of the Zen and Zoroastrian symbology of the triangle, the square, and the circle. And so this is one of the most magical shapes. And when I went through art school, we didn't have Photoshop, we didn't have Illustrator, where at the click of a button, I could create a shape. We had to learn how to draw all these shapes. And in doing so, and in researching it, I started to realize that these are the shapes that represent the human. And human is an interesting word. English itself is an interesting language because it's full of spells, because it was a language to help unify all of us on Earth underneath one linguistic pattern, so that then we could be spellcast to, in a sense. And so the triangle, the circle, and the square are the most fascinating because this is the representation, as I said, of the human. And if we break up the word hue and man, hue means colored or color or colors, and man is a representation of us all. So we are all the colored man, in a sense, or colored woman, in a sense. And so according to the scriptures of the universe from the Zen Buddhists, the square, the triangle, and the circle represent all of the elements that you would find in the universe. To Zoroaster, if you were to stack these, so you have the circle on top of the triangle on top of the square, this is a representation of the human. But it's also interesting that every single symbol, logo, icon, anything that's out there has some sort of element or aspect of the circle, the triangle, and the square. And so all these have multipliers. And so the square or the circle represents, if we were to add a multiplier for, say, of numbers, gematria, the circle represents 1. It's 1 element. The triangle represents 3. It's 3 elements. And the square represents 4. It's 4 elements, 4 sides, basically. And so you add these up and you get 8. 8 is an infinite number. It's also a magical number. We can take it a step further and add color theory to these. So the circle becomes blue, the triangle becomes red, and the square becomes green. And so alchemically, if you were to use red, green, and blue as light and you cross them over into one light pattern, you get a bright white light. We're looking at everything through a red, green, blue screen right now.
Mhm.
But if you were to take this as a pigment or a solid state, red, green, and blue make an alchemical black. And so the black becomes the rich alluvial soil or the prima materia. We can take it one step further and add elements to it. And so the elements then become blue equals water, red equals fire, and green equals earth. And so we have another alchemical base here because you're taking the earth, the fire, and the water to create the philosopher's stone or the alchemical properties. So these 3 shapes continually have more and more magic applied to them. We can take it one more step further and we can add dimension to them. So the blue water becomes a sphere of water, our earth. The red triangle becomes the tetrahedron or the pyramidos, the fire in the middle, right? So this is the pyramid. And then we have the green earth cube, and which is interesting because the cube has 6 sides. We have 6 continents on our planet: North America, South America, Eurasia, Africa, Australia, Antarctica. These are the 6 continents. And so they are all represented on one side of the cube.
Interesting.
And if you stack these elements, you have the head being the water element, the upper torso, either verted or inverted, becomes the triangular or pyramidic element, and our base element that's connected to the earth element, becomes our lower torso. And why is this important? Well, in our upper torso or our upper head, all of our water elements come from this. We have our mucous membranes, we have our tear ducts, we have fluid in our ears, we have our salivary glands. When we sweat first starts perspiring from your forehead before anywhere else. We have water inside of our eyes. We have water inside of our pineal gland. We ingest all of our liquids and our fuel through our body, through our mouth. And so this is why the head becomes the water element of the human. The upper torso then becomes the fire element, the generator of the body. And it's interesting because all of our generator organs are in our upper torso. We have our heart that pumps our rich blood throughout the rest of the body. We ingest our fuels, the heart and the body takes care of that. We have our stomach, which creates the fuel and the energy for our body through ingesting fuel into our body. We have our lungs, same thing. It takes in the oxygen, it processes it, it allows all of our organs to function. In the woman, we have the sacred womb space, which creates the next generation of life. So here's another generator organ. And all of this helps control the rest of the body from the water element to the fire element. So our upper torso is our fire element. But we are connected to earth through our earth element. If we take our feet off, we take our socks off and we go walk out in nature, we feel a connection spiritually and through electromagnetics to the earth, walking and scrunching our toes in the dirt or the sand when you're at the beach or any of these things. This is an amazing element. So we're connected and grounded to the earth through our earth elements. And it's interesting that we also give fertility back to the earth through our earth elements. So this is either through our urine or our feces. In the sacred man, our seed comes from the earth element. And then when it impregnates the seed of the woman, that rises back up into the generator and then recreates the generation of life. But these all come from earth elements. And so this is why I call these three symbols primarily the magic of the symbols, because these three symbols make up everything that we do in our life.
So this is kind of fascinating. And I don't think that things are accidents or happen, things that we sometimes don't pay attention to or trivialize or even minimize. So for example, like we scheduled this, right? However, I always wear, there are these specific diamond earrings that I've been wearing them as like everyday earrings. And interestingly enough, this morning when I got up, it wasn't on my ear. And I'm like, well, that's impossible because the type of clasp that it has, it goes not only through the ear piercing, but it also has a backing that hooks that kind of also serves as a clip-on. So there's supposedly no way that it can come off. But it did somehow come off. And I couldn't find it on my pillow on my bed. So I already did a little meditation thing. It's like, okay, angels, put my hands on it wherever it is, wherever it felt, because I didn't feel it fall off. I thought it's like impossible how it came off, but it came off. So then I reached over and look at the shape of you're going to laugh.
But of course.
Of course. And of course, it's not the only triangle I have on, because if you look at this, which it's
I
another
like that. That's a nice piece. Yeah.
And this has, we'll have to talk about that some other time, because this is a very specific gemstone that's inside this, but it has otherworldly and this worldly type of energies connected to it. But I don't think this is pretty obvious to me, especially sitting here. I knew we were going to talk about symbology and so forth, but I didn't know we were going to go down the rabbit hole of Saturn. Didn't know we were going to get into the square, the circle, and the triangle. And so I'd be remiss. I know better than to just not bring this up, but bring this not only to your attention, but to our viewers' attention, because when I can connect the dots in my own life and I can show people how I begin to connect the dots as things unfold, and then I can even look backwards and connect some dots. Sometimes it's not so easy to connect the dots moving forward, but as these things make themselves known, as they're being made known now, then we get cues from others. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this happens to me. Why did that happen to me? And if you pay attention, like right now, I've got kind of a good amount of wind, so the chimes are, and they're usually not playing when I have a broadcast, but the energy I think is high. And so this entire broadcast, I don't know if it'll be, I have a unidirectional mic, so I doubt it'll be picked up through this broadcast, because I don't think you can hear it, but I can hear it through this whole thing. Can you hear it?
Not really. No.
Not really. Yeah, I didn't think you would be able to, but I'm hearing it. I'm like, well, that's another sign too, because it's not just for a little bit. Throughout the entire broadcast, that chime has been playing.
And so that's really interesting, because symbols are not just visual. They're also sound frequency. They're also words, a play on words. I'm glad I brought up the square, the triangle, and the circle, because everybody's going to start noticing this everywhere. Everywhere you go, you're going to be like, oh, a square. Oh, a circular logo. Oh, a triangular logo, or different elements within your own life. But there's also objects that represent symbology. There's also words that represent symbology. And so I was starting to get into religious aspects. And so when you get into something like Islam, you have the cube of Mecca, the black cube of Mecca, which is interesting because here is a Saturnian symbol. Pilgrims will go to Mecca once a year during the Hajj, when Sirius rises above the horizon at the end of July, early August. So Sirius becomes a symbol. And you will counterclockwise rotate around the Kaaba, the cube, 7 times. So here's your rings of Saturn symbology that you were talking about earlier. Okay. And then eventually you will make your way up to the eastern corner, which is interesting because Sirius rises in the east during this time. And in the eastern corner is a silver yoni, okay, which is fascinating because this is Islam we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of it is a crystal that came from a meteorite. And the meteorite is said to have come from Sirius. And so you have Saturnian symbology, you have goddess symbology, and you have Sirius symbology, all located in one place in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And it's interesting because people look at this site as, oh, this is the most revered Islamic site on the planet. But the Kaaba cube itself was not originally Islamic. It was a goddess temple commissioned by the Queen of Sheba. And so talk about usurping other people's symbology. And so this is where we continually see this usurping or borrowing or attacking or plagiarism of other people's symbology, but they all come back to these very basic symbols in a sense.
So it's interesting that the cube in Islam, you said it's called the Kaaba cube.
Kaaba means cube, but it also means the body and the spirit, Ka and Ba, in the ancient Suf language. This is predates Islam and Arabic languages. So Ka is your double. It's your physical presence that you leave aside when you west, because in the ancient Suf and Comitian traditions, you never die. You follow the path of the sun. The sun has its own symbology. There's 5 phases. And when you go into Amun, which is where we get Amen from, you actually are going into darkness and the veil of darkness to be either reborn again or recycled back into the matrix, whatever we want to call it. And so it's interesting that one of the bodies that you need to shed in order to go through this process is your Ka. This is your physical form. It's your double because you are a spiritual form, right? And so your Ba is then a representation of your spirit. And the Ba is usually a bird with your head on it. So looking at a word like Kaaba, that's the first thing I see, but it also means cube.
Well, yeah. And so I can kind of sense, well, because there's Kabbalah
Yeah, and Merkaba.
and Merkaba. Yeah, there's Merkaba, and then you have Kabbalah, and now you have Kaaba cube.
Yeah,
And La in Arabic means no. So I don't know if you knew that, but the word just La, like, you have yes and no in English.
right.
Well, in Arabic, just La means no. So and then you're talking about Ka being your double. And the double is, this your spirit form of your etheric body, I would imagine.
Right. Yes.
Which it's funny because I've never thought of it as a double. I've always thought of it that's like your true self, and this is just your 3D representation, but your true self is that essence, I guess, or that energy.
It's what you leave behind while you go through the westing process. And so that's why it's your double. You're still yourself, but you're leaving your physical form behind.
Mm-hmm,
And so that's your double. Oh, there I am. Oh, wait a second. It's like when people have out of body experiences or, near death experiences, they're floating above their double, laying in bed or wherever they're having that experience. They're still themselves, but they're looking at themselves as a physical form. And that's what the Ka represents.
Yeah, it's a consciousness recognizing the 3D form.
Yes, correct.
Wow. What are there other symbols aside from the square, the triangle, and the circle that are also magical symbols that perhaps we have around us that maybe until you bring them up, we're not aware of?
Time is a big one because time is this infinity and it's always these cycles of 8. And so if we look at our clock, we have 24 hours in the day. Well, that's 3 periods of 8, right? You have the morning, the afternoon, and the evening, 8, 8, 8, 24. Okay. Your stop sign also is a symbol of 8. And so it automatically represents infinity of stopping. Stop. That's how we recognize it. Stop. Our compass points are the same: north, south, east, west, northeast, north, south, and all the secondary points: north, northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest. So there's 8 elements there. Infinity, infinite, right? So when you put your pen on paper, you can continually trace this dimensional path. Another huge one, you were talking, we've been talking religion. Where did the cross come from? So the cross is interesting because you can fold the cross up and create a cube, or you can unfold a cube to create the cross. But the original cross comes from ancient Cometian or Egyptian mythology, and this is the Ankh. And the Ankh is representational of the key of life. And so what do you see? You see a teardrop, two triangular elements that come out the side as arms, and a square base. And so the the rectangular base becomes the square or the cube. The triangular elements coming out as the arms become basically your fire elements or your life elements. And then you have the teardrop, which is your water element. But this is also a representation of the womb. So you have the canal, you have the fallopian, the tubes with the eggs, and then you have the actual womb itself.
Another triangle.
Right. And so interestingly, this was usurped, and you look at the symbol for the female, and it's a circle on top of a cross. And so these are all representation of the same thing. They've all been kind of usurped throughout time to represent the key of life. Well, what is life? It's the womb. To the ancient Greeks, the womb was known as the matrix. And so this is where matriarch comes from. Matrices comes from. And so it's the web of life. And in our movies today, I like to quote a lot of movies with my stuff. The matrix is, this force that we have to leave. Well, yeah, you're leaving the womb to be reborn. What is that movie all about? It's about a rebirth, into reality. And so there's a lot of esoteric and subliminal knowledge going on in all of our symbology. One of the largest ones I talk about is the Statue of Liberty, because it's very misconstrued as to what it means. Most people think it means freedom. So here's the Statue of Liberty. It's standing in the Lucifer form, which is interesting. So it's the light bearer holding the tablets of commandment with the corona. And if you look all over Europe at Lucifer statues, they're all in the same form. But it also represents the goddess Columbia, which we think is the goddess of America. But Columbia comes from ancient times. She is Ishtar, she is Isis, she is Aset. And she is Venus. And so this is where the connection with Lucifer also comes in, because Venus and Lucifer are interchangeable. And so is the Statue of Liberty a male or female? It's neither. It's a hermaphrodite. It's androgynous. And we always see it from beneath. So it stands on a pedestal on top of a star fort on Liberty Island. And everybody's like, oh, this is a representation of freedom. But in reality, liberty and freedom do not mean the same thing. Liberty is a nautical term.
Yeah.
And so when a ship breaks water, here's some maternity terms for you. When the ship breaks water and pulls into port, it berths in the port. And the captain then has to create a certificate of manifest of everything that's on the boat, people, things, everything that's on the boat. This becomes the birth certificate. Okay, which is interesting. Then the crew and the passengers on the boat ask the captain, do I have liberty to go ashore? So it's not freedom, it's a shore leave of sorts. And so you're granted a visa or a visitation to come ashore. Well, this is what the Statue of Liberty represents. You're granted a shore leave to enter our country for a specific amount of time, which is what your visitation or your visa implies. We never really see the Statue of Liberty from above looking down. And this is interesting because if you were to see this, the left leg of the Statue of Liberty is still shackled to the podium it stands on. So this statue truly does not represent freedom, but we think it does.
Another misperception. Wow, so there's a shackle around the Statue of Liberty's ankle?
Yeah, that's shackled to the podium.
So now that makes me wonder what's
we never see it from above. Yeah.
I don't know, I haven't. So I'm like, okay. And so now I'm wondering, because we talked about the cross and the ankh.
Oh, right.
The word ankle, obviously.
Ankle. Oh, wow. Okay.
So
interesting.
So what is the deeper meaning and so forth of that shackle being on that ankle.
Right. What is it holding back? So the male or the female form, who really knows? Because again, most people that look at the statue will
It's, yeah,
never see that perspective of it. And so you can't see it from standing on Liberty Island or coming into New York Harbor at all. You just see the statue standing there. So yeah.
you have to see it from above. Wow. So next time I fly into New York, I'll have to, I wonder if they don't allow planes to fly in that direction so that people can't maybe see that.
Here's the shackling.
Wow. That is very interesting.
So
So,
again, some symbols that are around us every day. And so we have like Liberty Mutual Funds and Liberty Bank and all these things that represent even Columbia. I mean, I live here in the Columbia Gorge, is like 30 minutes from where I live. The Columbia River I live next to. We have British Columbia, where this all comes out of. We have Columbia University. We have the Columbine. Columbine is a symbol of Columbia as well, represented by the dove. We have the country of Columbia. We have Columbus, Christopher Columbus. That wasn't his name. That was a title given to him as a male form of sailing under Columbia. His name was Cristobal de Colon. He was the illegitimate child of Pope Innocent VIII. We know this through his own family crest that's on Pope Innocent VIII's grave. And he came here, under false pretenses. Oh, I'm going to discover the Americas. Well, they were discovered by the Knights Templars and the Vikings long before
long
that.
before. Yeah. So what was all that about?
What was all that about? We have the District of Columbia, which is our
Right.
capital, right? So the list goes on and on and on. And so what is this symbology, and why are we constantly being bombarded by it? Columbia Pictures, the Columbia Space Shuttle, which sadly we lost in recent times, coming back into orbit. And so there's a lot of elements and symbology around Columbia, or the Statue of Liberty, as we know her or it. Anyway.
So this is, so I would say to anyone watching this right now, if any of this really resonates with you, intrigues you, piques your curiosity, you might want to pick up Hans Dietrich's book on regarding these magical symbols, and start to connect the dots, because as you become aware and as you realize and recognize when you're reading this book, it's going to bring top of the mind awareness to things that otherwise would have gone unnoticed. And there's always, one thing is to have a certain level of knowledge, but the other thing is application. How does this apply to my life? Why? Because I really do believe more and more that as above, so below, as within, so without. So whatever it is that's outside of you, there are things that you are rattling, that are bouncing inside of you, for lack of a better word. It's bouncing inside of you, and sometimes it needs to be brought in the 3D. It's outside of you, so that then you can take a greater look at it, so that thing can be literally resolved and dissolved.
Yes.
And so this book is a physical manifestation. You make no mistakes. Absolutely 100% positively true, without a shadow of a doubt. If you are watching this, whether it's on the live or it's on the replay, there's no such thing as time. So whenever it is that you come across this video and you're watching this is the perfect time for you to become aware, realize and recognize that
Bingo.
You've been asking for something in 3D form that would be tangible, that you could study. And the vessel that was selected for it to come through was Hans. And he has written it already, and he can provide it for you. And information that's taken an entire lifetime to compile in this book. How many pages is it, Hans?
It's about 140 pages. My whole idea with my books is to create an introductory to these topics, because we're so overwhelmed and we're so bombarded. And I have bookshelves full of academic books that are 400, 500, 600 pages long, that are very difficult for most people to get through. And so it's like, I wanted something that's visual. I wanted something that's, not so academic, but has more of an esoteric value to it. And so there, it's chock full of pictures. It goes through color theory. It goes through so many different elements of symbology. But it's like I said, it's topographic. It's just an introductory to these, because I want people to start realizing we're surrounded by
We
so
are.
many symbols and so many elements all day long. Where do you start? This is a great place to start. So
So I couldn't help but notice also the backdrop that you have. Number one, they're all squares. The earth element, but then yet you have, you know, the beautiful color elements behind you. You've got the pinks, the purples, the blues in your background as well. And then you have the tiny circles behind those squares. So again, the universe is putting clues all before you. The question is, are you paying attention? And so where can people get this book? If they want to get this specific book on the magic of symbols, where would they get that? Can they get that on Amazon or?
So I self-published through lulu.com, and you can find The Magic of Symbols and my other book, Dropa, Legends and Lore. These are the two books I have currently up through Lulu. You can also find them on my website, which is megalithic.mysteries.com. You can also find it through megamist.com, which is a shorthand of Megalithic Mysteries. And there's a lot of different stories and my adventures to Peru and Egypt and a lot of the places that I've been, as well as many of the interviews that I've done there as well relating to these topics. So,
Okay, do you have a YouTube channel as well?
I do. It's called Giza Direct. And so if you just look up through Google Giza Direct YouTube, you'll find it. It's not a direct link. YouTube has some issues with that sometimes, but it's very easy to find. And I've interviewed, having been to Peru and having been to Egypt several times, I've interviewed Brian Forrester, Patricia Iwan, Yusuf Iwan. I have a lot of their lectures and stuff up there, as well as interviews of my own. I've done interviews with Brad Olson, who was at Biomet Expo and our events in LA as well, talking about our travels and experience through South Asia. I grew up in South Asia for half of my life, as I said. And so it's always nice to find other people that have traveled there. And then just in general, a lot of interviews, mostly related around Dropa, but some of them have been around symbology. I did two major interviews with Johnny Enoch about symbology. One was The Magic of Symbols, and then the second one was all about Saturnian symbology. And we were going to do a follow-up on Sirius symbology, because Sirius is another one that comes up a lot. But
Yeah.
a lot of that is covered in the book. And so there's a lot going on in this across the map.
So there you are, my friends and gems. You can tell that we could easily take this into another hour or two or three or
As
more.
we will.
As we will, but we just won't do it all at the same time.
Yeah, correct.
I'm so tempted to go, let's talk about Sirius, because I've got some stories about that too. But what we'll do is we'll bring you back. We will have Hans Dietrich back. You can also look him up through Facebook. And we're Facebook friends as well. So you can always look him up under my friends list and so forth. But I will be sure to guide you to the mega mystic.
Megalithic or megamist.com.
Megamist.
They both go to the same site.
And they both go to the same site. So that's great. So we'll pick one of those. We'll put that in the show description here so that you can watch it. And definitely, I want to encourage you to reach out to him through Facebook, reach out to him through YouTube, watch his content, because I think, in fact, I don't want to say I think. I absolutely come from a place of knowingness where I know, and the chimes are getting louder, interesting.
I hear them now, actually.
Yeah, so it's like,
and it's funny you say that, because I have chimes on my back porch that I'm hearing going off as well.
So, and again, now when you become more aware, you realize it's like, oh, that's not just, no, if you hear an ambulance, that's the universe telling you, pay, whatever it is that's going on right now, pay attention. So you can't afford to miss this. You want to get this information as quickly as possible. Hans, it's been a beautiful hour. Thank you for honoring us with your time and your presence. I know.
Thank you for the time. I thought this would be a lot shorter, and I appreciate the time that you've given me.
This is absolutely awesome. All right, my friend Jim, take care. Have a great one, and we will talk to you very soon. Ciao for now, my friends and gems.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers.